morning, everyone, once again. Welcome to Civil Service College webinar. Unfortunately, your usual host, Andrea, is not available this morning, so I'm covering for her. My name is Chris. I'm the Operations Director, and this morning I'll be hosting this webinar and introducing our speaker, Ruben. Ruben has an incredible journey. He is an expert in social model of disability, and he's currently a trainer and actor helping organizations to understand this social model of disability. He became a casualty simulator actor and facilitator for the British military. He went on to train London Overground frontline staff members in disability equality rights, as well as customer service staff through role play, followed by more extensive training for London Underground staff for over 4,000 staff members. He is a well-established disability equality trainer, and he currently trains Uber on equality, and in particular the relevant legislations around the Equalities Act from 2010. So this morning we have 1 hour with Ruben, so you're going to tell us a bit more how to face disability heads on. Please use the chat to ask questions, and we want to keep this as interactive as possible, and I will ask Ruben during the webinar, but also at the end there's a Q&A section that I can ask Ruben the questions that you have put in the chat. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ruben.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you everybody for attending. If any of you were signed up originally for the webinar on the 1st of December, I apologize for having to push it back until February. I had a stroke in November, but I'm doing well. I am still having trouble finding my words, so if I do get stuck a little bit, just bear with me, and I will get through it. So welcome everybody, and I am originally from California, warm and sunny, where we get about 300 days of sunshine a year, and even when it rains, we joke and we say, at least it's a dry rain, because it's not so damp, but you know, they say a bad day at the beach is better than a good day at work, and we kind of strive for being surfing and active. But I was born there where the sun always shines, and it has its advantages and disadvantages, but it's where my love of motorcycles came in. I was one day I was going to work, and I was at a red light wanting to turn when a blue van pulled up beside me. I wasn't cutting traffic, so he had no business there. I don't know if he thought I was cutting, but he just thought I wasn't going fast enough for him, and he didn't like motorcycles, and he had a thing about motorcycles, but
Могу ли изляза за малко?
Yes? Okay. But when the light turned green, his wing mirror hit my handlebars and knocking me underneath a fully loaded gravel lorry. These are actual photographs from the accident scene that when the police did an investigation. You can see my motorcycle there. The lorry driver wasn't aware that I was underneath his vehicle. He then went and dragged me 30 feet because I was stuck in front of the back wheels of the truck. And then when he slowed down, he ran me over, and the wheels grabbed hold of my motorcycle, went up and over the motorcycle and myself. The motorcycle brunting the majority of the weight, because if that would have really taken me, it would have taken me completely. When he finally came to a stop, the bike had exploded from the sparks and the petrol tank. A passing motorist saw what happened, and that's Doug right there with his back to us. He saw what happened, and he stopped, and he proceeded to get out and put the fire out, dragging my bike away from me. One person got a fire extinguisher on the bike. Meanwhile, Doug, who I now call my lifesaver, put the fire out with his bare hands. The next thing is, I know that you're not supposed to remove or move the victim, but Doug pulled my helmet off and asked me if I was okay, make sure that he see if he could help. This was the action that saved my life, because he kept talking to me as I was blacking out, and he kept me, I was in severe pain and I was ready to black out, but he kept me talking and asked me all sorts of questions to make sure that I didn't lose consciousness. I spent the next 5 weeks in a coma and 6 months in the hospital. And then I rehabbed 3 more months in a specialist facility. When I got to go home, I spent another 1.5 years in a hospital bed, and I had multiple doctor's appointments to try to save my leg, only to be told that there was no possibility of rehabilitation due to the severe ossification or bone growth that I had. This bone growth wrapped around my femoral artery, but I really, wanted to look normal, as they say, but by this time I was ready to gain my mobility, even if that meant losing my leg. And although I was okay with this, I was still in shock. It was still a shock to the system, because you mourn the loss of a body part. They cut a piece of me off. But I was excited when my doctor came in the day before my surgery, and he said, "Ruben, as soon as we get this leg amputated and get you healed up, we'll start your rehabilitation and get you a prosthesis. That way you won't be disabled anymore. You look normal." This is a typical medical professional and the medical model. And this is the only thing that I knew. I wanted to look normal. I wanted to walk, and so you don't appear disabled. And this is what we're told when a life-changing injury happens. Like some people are obsessed about getting to walk again instead of being a wheelchair, and they feel that a wheelchair is a matter of giving up. No matter how much you're tired, how much it tires you out, and how badly you walk, they see the wheelchair as a sign of defeat and lose out on going. For example, going to the mall, just because walking is so limited, and they don't want to be seen in a wheelchair. This is often instilled in people by society, by the medical professionals. So after I was at an all-time low in my life, I had my wife left me, as she didn't sign up for this, and my business was failing because I had my own business doing pigeon control, putting spikes up on signs, and it was quite physical. I couldn't get physically involved anymore. I was so depressed that I contemplated taking my own life as the only way out, and I felt sorry for myself, and I couldn't see anything else. I really needed something to pick me up, and my daughter gave me these books. That one thing that stuck out in the Christopher Reeves book, and I'm paraphrasing on this, but he says, you start to rehabilitate and getting better, to think that that you want to be there for your friends and for your family and the people that love you, but you eventually learn to do it for yourself. And that was one turning point in my life. But by this time, I had done nothing with my life for a very long time. My wife had left. I couldn't run my business anymore, as it was quite physical at times. This left me with having to completely reorientate and concentrate on what I'm good at and what I had studied. And I knew working on a cherry picker was not an option now. Neither was working on any building sites with a prosthesis or without a prosthesis. This isn't how the doctor described it to me. I actually have an impairment with a prosthesis, and that I'm still missing a leg. Now, while my house was more or less okay to move around in, the rest of the world was not, because I later learned that the outside world was designed by non-disabled people for non-disabled people. I had to learn this the hard way. Public transportation, restaurants, cinema, you can't go in because you're a fire risk. And I started to learn and think about what it is that really disables me. When I was going on the dating scene, which is daunting at the best of times, I signed up to a mainstream dating site. And whilst I didn't want to disclose that I had an impairment on my profile, I did talk about it later on. So as soon as I mentioned it, though, I was completely ghosted, or they wished me luck and sent me on my way. Then I did the opposite out of spite, and I just to see what would happen. And I went on a dating profile, and it read like my medical history. It told them what was wrong with me. I was missing a leg, what I was broken, and I hardly had a response. But a woman finally wrote me and said, "You're not going to get a lot of emails with that profile." She was being funny about it, but I guess she was right. And the only problem is at the time that I still lived in sunny Los Angeles and she lived in foggy London. Well, to cut a long story short, I married this woman and we have been together now for 14 years. She's an occupational therapist, so she can totally has no problem with disability. So when I came over here, while jobs for somebody with my impairment don't come up very often, there was someone who approached me to train Army medics, as Chris mentioned before. They use amputees and special effects makeup to simulate a road traffic collision, an IED explosion, what it does to people. And that can save lives because they use these amputees and they have to stop the catastrophic bleed, and it trained them up. And I like the training side of it, but I also had to experience laying in a ditch for hours on end, and it rained and snowed on me, and that's a younger man's game. I did it for about 2.5 years, but it did get to me at some point. And I like the training side, but I don't like the laying in the ditch. That's when I applied for an acting job one day for a training company who specialized in role play training, and that's where I met my mentor, I say, Barbara, who is a well-known disability campaigner, and she helped form the DDA 1995. She was out there protesting. She was handcuffing herself to the bus, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And she changed the disability world a little bit. And she taught me that there are not necessarily disabled, that we're not necessarily disabled by our impairments. I'm not disabled because of I'm missing a leg, but by society, whether it's an inaccessible environment or society's attitude towards disability. And this is where I finally got the hint, and I felt that this is what I really want to do. Paired with my acting training, I thought that I can teach or tell the non-disabled world what there is to know. Let me start off with a couple facts. So there's 66.8 million people in the UK. 14.1 million of those people, 1 in 5 of those people have an impairment. And a lot of them have more than one impairment. Only around 15 to 20% of disabled people were born with their impairment. That means the majority, 80 to 85% of people, will gain an impairment later on in life, either through trauma, through diagnosis, through age. And only 8%, about 8%, use a wheelchair. So what does that say? That says that a lot of impairments are invisible. That means 90% of people are not in a wheelchair. 92% of people are not in a wheelchair. And so you can't just look at somebody and tell that they have an impairment, because a lot of these impairments are invisible. Disabled workers earn about 12% less than their non-disabled counterparts. And that goes without saying that disabled workers also spend about 128 pounds a week more than their non-disabled counterparts. So let me talk a little bit about medical model of disability, because this is the fact of throughout history, we've always been looked at and judged on what we can't do, what somebody can't do. If somebody can't walk, you're disabled if you can't see and you can't talk and you're mentally ill. And let me back up a little bit. The word model is an academic or sociological way of understanding things. There are models of all elements in life, including race, gender, social position, age, childhood, etc. With disability, there are two main models, the medical model and the social model. And the medical model focuses on what somebody can't do. Mentally ill, you'll hear, and these are all in quotes because I'm not going to get into language a little bit, but they're in quotes because it's not correct. It's not politically correct, and it comes from the medical model, and nobody wants to be addressed by what's wrong with you. There's something broken. You have special needs. You can't hear. You're wheelchair bound and less intelligent. And that's been throughout history. That's how we've always known disability. Well, and this is what changed everything. The social model of disability, the barriers I face in daily life. My medical model barrier was more complicated for me to get up in the morning or change a stoma bag or a catheter, negotiate my two-story house. And there is this medical model that we have to deal with, but we don't want to. We're disabled by society, by a poor building design, by employment or unemployment, lack of misrepresentation in the media, negative media, segregated education, prejudice attitudes, lack of rights, and we face oppression. What really disables are the businesses that don't have a lift or an accessible toilet. Sometimes it's not as simple as being able to get into the building. I mean, I was once invited to a job interview and they couldn't even get me into reception, let alone an interview room, which left everybody a little bit embarrassed. So the job interview took place outside. Another barrier could be at that time that people make assumptions of what you can or can't do, which isn't helpful. Needless to say, I didn't get the job. When I go out to dinner, for example, and the waiter asks my partner what I want to order, people, she says, well, why didn't you ask him? Because they just assume that I can't read the menu. Or people misusing disabled bays. I've challenged people that without a blue badge when they occupy the only disabled spaces there, and they say, I'm only going to be a minute. Well, so am I, but I can't get to it. Or public transportation routes. I mean, I need to plan in advance meticulously if I take public transportation. Only about 30% of stations are step-free, which doesn't even mean step-free at all because you still have to wait for somebody to bring a ramp out. And then there's other barriers that people face. No application in Braille, no BSL interpreters. Sometimes it's just as easy thinking ahead as what somebody might require and then put reasonable adjustments in place. And when I worked at a bank, they had a step stool for people that were short for the higher filing cabinets. And for those people that, and those people weren't disabled, but they made this adjustment. They put in a step stool so they can reach the upper cabinets. And that was a reasonable adjustment. And reasonable adjustments don't often cost money at all. Why don't businesses give their employees the tools that they need to do their job, the best of their abilities? This has sometimes not even anything to do with the disability, like a gel mouse pad, flexible working hours, etc. Often people don't even realize that their rights have been violated. Why? Because we haven't known better, and it's always been around the medical modeling. Oh, you can't get up to the filing cabinet? Well, that's because you're missing a leg. That's because you're in a wheelchair. And we've always been oppressed, and we believe that that is how society is, and have always experienced exclusion, neglect, abuse by the legal system. So here's somebody who wants to get to work, but they're in a wheelchair. And why are they disabled? Well, is it because they're in a wheelchair? No. That's what we've always been told. That's what we've always known. You're disabled because you're in a wheelchair, because you can't get up the stairs. And changes can be made. And if that's made accessible, then that person can get a job. For example, even today, and if you think, well, things are getting better. Well, yes, they might be getting better, but there's a lawsuit against the English government because there was no BSL interpreter at the coronavirus briefings. Other countries did it. Canada, Scotland, Wales had a BSL interpreter. North Ireland had one, but the English government did not. They said, well, if you want to get the news coverage, then you should get either put the subtitles or have the change the channel to the one with the box. So some people say that these adjustments are being made, but they're really not. They can mean well, and they can look at society and who benefits from these changes. When you start making changes, if you put a ramp up to the door, who's going to use it? Yeah, you might put the ramp because of wheelchair users, but the ramp is going to be used by children, by parents with prams, by older people that find it difficult to walk. Same thing with the lift. When you put in a lift because you are trying to address the social model of disability, who benefits from that? Everybody does. Disabled people have a spending power of 250 billion pounds in the UK. That's money that they want to spend. That's money that somebody wants to earn. But in order to earn that, you have to make these adjustments. So why is this so important? It identifies barriers in society. The social model of disability is about identifying barriers. And discrimination should be tackled through law, whether it's direct discrimination, whether somebody is treated differently or not as well as other people because of their disability, or indirect discrimination, which can occur in the workplace. Practice or procedure is applied to all employees, but disadvantages those that are disabled. Disabled people have to be involved in this change. And it's the same thing with, the Black Lives Matter movement or the suffragettes. The people, the group that's being oppressed has to be included in the conversation. Why did women get the right to vote? Because they fought for it. Why are Black Lives Matter happening? Because people are fighting for it. But the thing is around disability, disabled people have to fight for it, and we shouldn't have to. Barriers can be removed, and everybody benefits. Are there any questions, Chris?
I think it's more comments that people have left. I mean, Ian posted a link to point out. I mean, in Scotland, there's a greatest sign changing some of the signs outside of disabled toilets across Scotland, and change that to a more include accessible toilet, having not just a person on a wheelchair and so the visual symbol, but also have people, other man and woman there as well. So just I think going back to what you said about also language, but also using visual can actually change people's attitude, be more mindful of that, moving away from that medical model of disabilities to a more social model of disability.
All right, thank you. Anything else?
Yeah. Also, the UKSA Inclusive Data Task Force have recently recommended using measures of disability more firmly based upon biopsychosocial model conceptual frameworks.
Right. And the biopsychosocial model, and also we need to think about intersectionality, because disability doesn't discriminate. It can affect all of us. If 80% of disabled people have their impairment later on in life, then is it just the elderly? No, it affects everybody, just like myself. I wasn't born disabled. I gained it later on in life through trauma. And that affects everybody, no matter what religion you are, what sex you are, what nationality you are. It's going to affect everybody, and people forget about that. When we talk about being inclusive, we think about Black Lives Matter movement, being inclusive of minorities, but we're a large portion of the minority because it doesn't affect us. We can be black, brown, it doesn't matter. Just it can affect every single one of us. And this is why we need to address it. So what the law says about equality. Now, it protects a person if under 9 characteristics: age, disability, which I'm talking about, sex, gender reassignment, race, religion, belief, sexual orientation, marriage, civil partnership, and pregnancy and maternity. And it doesn't just affect that person with that one, and it covers all of us, because we all have an age, we all have a sex, we all have a race, and we all have a gender. And so the Equality Act protects all of us, and it says that everybody has the treatment to the right to a fair treatment, and to be free from discrimination, harassment, or victimization. Now, that not only includes the person with the characteristic, but also if you're associated with them. So say, for example, my wife can't be discriminated against at work because of my disability. And what does that, or for example, marriage and civil, or pregnancy and maternity. So if a woman goes in and says, to a job interview, and she says that she's thinking about getting pregnant and starting a family, she can't be discriminated against based on that. Same thing. If her partner goes in for a job interview and says, we're thinking about starting a family, they can't be discriminated against. And a reasonable adjustment should be made so everybody can do a job or use a service. Now, a person has a disability if they have a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term adverse effect, long-term meaning more than 12 months, to carry out their normal day-to-day activities. Now, that includes eating, getting dressed, shopping, normal day-to-day activities. So substantial means more than minor or trivial. Long-term means more than 12 months, and normal day-to-day activities. So people who have a disability in the past that meets this definition are also protected by the law. So even if you are suspected of having it, you're still protected. So which includes things like using a telephone. And the Equality Act says changes or adjustments should be made to ensure that you can access the following things: education, employment, housing, goods, services like shops and banks, cinemas and hospitals. I should be allowed in the hospital. I should be allowed in the cinema. For a long time, wheelchair users weren't allowed in cinemas because we were a fire hazard. For a long time, somebody traveling on the tube in a wheelchair had to have somebody with them. And associations of private clubs like the Scouts and Guides and private golf clubs, if anyone needs an adjustment to do a job and it's reasonable, like in a bank with a step stool, well, why wouldn't you just do it? So I don't know if any of you have seen this, and it's equality versus equity. And equality, in the first image, it's assumed that everybody will benefit from the same support, that they're being treated equally. Everybody has the box, and they can use it to stand on. That's equality. Equity, the individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. In this case, a baseball game. They're being treated equitably. So this is equality, and that's equity. But then there's justice, and that's removing the barrier altogether. The fence was the wood fence was the barrier. In the third image, all three can see the game without any support accommodations because the cause of the inequality was excess. The systematic barrier has been removed. And this might not seem like a lot to you, but justice is a long-term equity. So it is equity, but it's long-term. It looks to create equity in a system as well as the individuals. Justice can take equity one step further by fixing the system in a way that leads to long-term, sustainable, equitable access for generations to come. And that's why I'm so adamant about making the changes, about teaching people about equity and justice. So a lot of times, and I mentioned this earlier on, but where, the medical model was about the media too, how people see disabled people in the media. And I'm going to talk about unconscious bias. Now, most of you would probably say, I'm not biased. If I ask you to close your eyes, picture yourself going into an office to be met by a receptionist sitting behind a desk, who do you see? Who do you see sitting behind that desk? What does the receptionist look like? If you said a man, well done. But you probably said a woman, because we've always been seen as we've always seen through the media that a receptionist is a woman. Anne Hathaway and witches. So people were complaining about this because they cast Anne Hathaway and changed her hands and to be disfigured. Now, people with similar hand conditions were upset because this made her look evil. We've always thought, as somebody with an impairment, witches with a big nose, right, and a big mole. We've always known that. But Roald Dahl didn't even describe her as that. The witch in Roald Dahl's book had claws for nails. Claws for nails. So her nails were long, her claws. But we always have been, and we've always seen it in the media. Sam Claflin in Me Before You. If you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, he dies. He takes his own life because disabled people, because he was depressed and he didn't like to deal with it. And we've always thought of, oh, you poor thing. Disabled people, you poor thing. Or you've been seen as a superhero, superhuman. Channel 4, Channel 4 in the 2012 Olympics portrayed disabled people. Superhuman was the commercial. And we complained about that because we're not superhuman just because we're disabled and we can still do things. We are human. And they got it this year because the last Olympics, they had the superhuman on the bottom of the screen, but they smashed it. They smashed the word super. A new study by the Employers Network for Equality and Inclusion today suggests that a level of unconscious bias against disabled people rose by almost 8% before the Paralympic Games. Despite government figures suggesting that 2/3 of the people believe attitudes toward disabled people have improved since the Paralympic Games, the study found that the UK has not seen a reduction in unconscious bias of disabled people and instead has seen a rise. And the Paralympics in 2012 failed to reduce unconscious bias by bias levels against disabled people. So you can see that you can mean well, but you still have this unconscious bias. So we're either seen as a victim or superhuman. Well, the reality is we're all in the middle, but it's always been focused around the medical model. So what can you do to overcome this bias or understanding the social model? Well, understanding the social model that we are not the problem. Disabled people aren't the problem. Where it's not about what's wrong with you. It's not about what you can't do, but you have to educate yourself. You need to learn to identify and remove barriers, identify these access needs. And I don't mean just the ramps and physical barriers. There's also information, lack of easy read, simple read, lack of BSL interpreters, lack of Braille. It can be attitudes. Oh, what does he want for dinner? What does he want for lunch? He can't order, so you're going to have to do it for him. No, we can do it ourselves. And if we can't, then we deal with that. But that's the medical model, and the medical model will always exist. That's something that's stationary, that's permanent. I'm never going to get my leg back. The medical model says that I'm disabled because I'm missing a leg. okay? But disability is a social context, a social construct. Disability is really, so my missing a leg is my impairment. Disabled is a word to use to describe the barriers and what stops us from doing things. It's not our condition that stops us, it's society, and it can change. Don't assume, don't be afraid to ask, and you have to get involved in order to do that. Disabled people have always been known. They have to, the people that are oppressed have to fight for it. Like I said, the Black Lives Matter movement, changes are being made because they're fighting for it. Women's rights. Do you know that 40% of the boardroom now consists of women? Congratulations. And it needs to be up by 52% because that's the population. But they have to fight for it. Why? Why shouldn't we just be able to live in an equal world? Why do we have to fight for our rights? The only reason changes came about is because disabled people became involved in making the decisions for them. They were made by non-disabled people for non-disabled people, or non-disabled people for disabled people. Well, we need to get disabled people involved in that. They have to be involved in because we know the solution to barriers in society as well, better than anybody. The only reason there's ramps on the buses, the only reason the wheelchair can get on the bus now, today, is because they passed a law in 1995, which wasn't that long ago, 1995, that they put a ramp in the bus. And that was because people handcuffed themselves to the bus. They climbed under the bus and handcuffed themselves, taking their own lives at risk, and they fought for it. And you would think that in the 21st century, that we wouldn't have to fight so hard for equality. The same way the suffragettes fought for the right to vote. Look where they are today. Same way as the Black Lives Matter movement. Hopefully continue to change the lives for the better, but it will take the group of people that are being oppressed to get change facilitated. And we in any marginalized group need allies, because we are not talking about a few people. We're talking about 20% of the population with the spending power of 250 billion people, $250 billion. Same way I've trained Uber drivers. I'm trying to get changes in place. I'm trying to mold society to change because everybody benefits from these changes. You know, I write a column in a magazine to change people's minds, and disabled people. Just because we gain an impairment doesn't mean we go to bed and we wake up the next morning and now, oh wow, I understand the social model of disability. No, disabled people have to be involved. They have to be taught. They have to understand it's not your impairment that stops you. It's society that stops you. So disabled people have to be educated. The doctor said I would never ride a motorcycle again. Well, here I am, and okay, it's a trike, but I can skydive. And these are things I would have never done before my accident. I'm traveling the world. I'm finding life much more satisfying than before my accident. I've traveled the world. I've done things that I would have never done had it not been for my accident. My life wasn't that great. If somebody came up to me and says, well, Ruben, if you could snap your fingers and get your leg back, wouldn't you want to? Maybe but not if it meant going back to that life I had before. My life before my accident wasn't that great. I like my life. I appreciate my life. Don't call me inspirational for being able to dress myself or eat breakfast. I'm just a guy living my life to the fullest, trying to teach other people that society doesn't have to stop them, and you can do anything you want. And I have a name, and it's Ruben. If you want any information, the information I got was the Equality Act 2010, Office for National Statistics, the Labor Force Survey, ONS, the Annual Population Survey, and Independent 2019. So if you want to check any of my stats, feel free to go and do that. Also, if you want any references, the National Institute for Blind People, the RNIB, the Royal National Institute for Deaf People, National Autistic Society, the British Deaf Association, Down Syndrome Association. I mean, and the list goes on, but to really make a change, you have to get people involved. And if you don't know where to get people involved, then one of these places will help you. Any questions? Chris, you back?
Thank you, Ruben. I think that's very good presentation. I think you're right. I think in particularly you said that paradigm that we often look at this either victims or superhuman, but in the end we just want everyone to be an equal part of the society and actually enjoy the life, having a very fulfilling life, and that's what I think we want in the end. And you talked about how disabled people should, actively, get involved, make change, and also how non-disabled people actually need to have better awareness, actually engage with different groups. And Dan actually asked the questions like, in terms of campaigning and fighting for change, there is a difficult balance between disabled people working with organizations and industries and deliberately highlighting known issues where problem is known and efforts, however slow, are being made to address it. What's your take on that balance? And he meant more direct action. Okay,
I'm assuming like jobs like cabin crew. I couldn't be a member of the cabin crew because of my disability. I know that there's my impairment. I know that there are things that stop me in society because of my impairment. But if we can make that accessible, I can get on the plane. I can fly. Even if I couldn't transfer out of my wheelchair independently, there's wheelchairs on a plane to get down the aisle to use the toilet, and that's to get them more to make everything more accessible. But accessible toilets, there aren't very many on the airplane. As far as a place of work, there are things. Look, the medical model does exist, but we don't want to let that stop us from doing things. And it's making changes for society that will get us over that. There are things. I hope that answers the question. I mean, let me think about that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, Brenda also talked about accessible toilets are always locked. Like wherever she finds them, they've always been told that there's a special key you need to obtain, but it's not often being found. And so that's another issue that I think people we need to campaign on.
Yeah, the radar key came around in the 80s because every accessible toilet had a lock, a different key, and we had to go ask like little children, can I need to go wee, can I use the loo? And so they came out with the radar key. Anybody can have one. I wish they would do away with the radar key, but that's I don't know why they want to keep people out. I don't understand, because anybody can use an accessible toilet. A parent with a child will probably use a toilet. I want every toilet to be accessible, and then we wouldn't have a need for that. It's a lot of time about the design, and a lot of times people have to be involved in it from the beginning, from the design stage. It's the same way with the buses. Okay, we got ramps on buses, but there's only one space on the bus for a wheelchair. So that means if I travel with another wheelchair person another person that uses a wheelchair, then he has to catch the next bus, or she has to catch the next bus. We can't sit together. Ireland overcame that. They put the parents with prams, because we can't discriminate against parents either. And in London, a lot of the buses use they have the parents with the prams where the wheelchair space is, or the accessible space is. And the law says that, okay, if the pram can be folded, you have to take the child out and fold the pram. But who's gonna enforce that? And then even then, that isn't completely accessible. where in Ireland they put the parents with the prams in the back of the bus, so they have plenty of space for the prams, and then they put two wheelchair spaces on the bus, and they even have a raised platform for a guide dog. So that's what I'm talking about, is getting disabled people involved in the beginning. That bus was designed by non-disabled people for non-disabled people. And then they made the modification, made a wheelchair space. Now it was designed by non-disabled people for disabled people. Well, we disabled people have to be involved from the beginning, from the planning stage.
Thank you, Ruben. I know, Dan, you got your hands up. Just bear with me. Let me ask one more question from the chat, and then I will get back to you on that. Paul asks, on balance, has the increase in use of virtual technology during the pandemic brought benefits or disbenefits to the working lives of disabled colleagues?
Okay, so to answer the question, both. We have been saying we want more flexible hours, more flexible working schedule for a long time, many years, 20 years. It's now, because of the pandemic, because they said it couldn't be done. Now, because of the pandemic, it can be done. But now that the pandemic is nearing the end, I hope, people are going back to work, and they want to take away those flexible hours, but those flexible hours are working. But what it can do is isolate. Sometimes people have to isolate because of their health, because they have to isolate, for whatever reason, and we want to get them out of isolation. They need the interaction again. They need to get on with their friends, as we all do. We don't want to be stuck at home. So again, everybody benefits. But being able to have these flexible hours to work from home has been a definite benefit and a definite plus.
Thank you, Ruben. Dan, could you unmute and ask the questions that you had in mind earlier?
Yeah, it's really interesting chat, and some really interesting, good examples around transport that you've given already. That's my kind of field. I work with some disabled organisations who are lobbying for change, and I get the sense that sometimes there's a difficult balance between satisfying their members that they're being vocal enough around some of the inequality that exists, and working with the industries that they're trying to change. So I'm trying to think of a practical example. So someone knows that a train is inaccessible. A member of an organisation knows that it's inaccessible, but they turn up, they try and board that train, and that story then features in the press, and it gives a much more negative impression of the industry than perhaps is the case. Whereas,
yeah, but that go ahead.
Go on, sorry. I was just going to say, kind of, on the one hand, it's publicising a really valid point, but on the other, it tends to, I won't say alienate, that's the wrong word, but it kind of makes the people working for that train operating company less willing to work with that organisation, if that makes any sense.
Okay, let me ask you this. What if tomorrow Transport for London said you can only access 30% of the trains? You can't access, women can access 100%, but men can only now use 30% of the lines.
Yeah.
Would you protest?
No, I totally get the point. It's a valid one, and if I don't have lived experience, so I'm not nearly as passionate as some of the people that I deal with and speak to. I guess the difficulty is if you're flagging something that and you're pointing the finger at the train operating company who are already trying to deal with the problem, sometimes it can have an adverse impact on the relationship between the disabled organisation and the train operating company. And
it can, but that's how change is made. I mean, look at all the disabled people that handcuffed and put their lives at risk and handcuffed themselves to the bus to get it to change. Yeah. And it changed. It doesn't have to be negative. We might not feel that it's not fast enough, these changes. But if we can, we're doing this one at a time and bringing light to it. If people might not be made aware that they can't get on this, on this train, and if they're made aware by somebody pulling a publicity stunt per se, right? That's kind of what it is.
Yeah.
They'll bring light to it, and by bringing light to it, we'll make changes.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. And Darren actually also got his hands up. Darren, would like to ask the question?
Hi, I don't know if you can actually see me because I seem to be having a bit of a problem. Can you hear me?
That's okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
We've had a real problem in this area. We've had power go off, and I've been without power for nearly 5 days. Trying to actually get any priority as a disabled person, I've got multiple sclerosis, has been ridiculous. I know that they provide generators to people that need medical equipment that's powered by electric, like ventilators and things, but they don't seem to appreciate that people, it's 5 days without any heat, any light, being able to get to the toilet, trying to get up and down stairs. Although you're not using a wheelchair, I mean, I've got progressive multiple sclerosis. I still have got the risk of falling down the stairs. We're in an area where we've got no mobile signal. So if an accident happens, there's no way of communicating with emergency services. The government has said that we need electric cars. Well, okay, I've now got an electric mobility car, but I've not been able to charge it for 5 days. My nearest shop's 5 miles away. So to make a phone call, you have to go and plug the car in, use a little bit of power, get to a place where you do get a mobile signal, phone them, and then they seem to think that you can communicate with them. And I say, I go back home and I haven't got a phone, I haven't got a mobile signal, and I've tried to be as patient as possible. And I am because of my disability. I've got myself as an elected councillor. I'm trying to do a health campaign for people who have conditions to have an MRI scan. Sorry, I'm rambling on. I've just got my power back in, and it's been quite a lot of days, so I've joined here. But it's just, I can understand how people don't appreciate, and I wouldn't have appreciated certain conditions before I had multiple sclerosis. And as an afterthought, my multiple sclerosis has been brought on by having a disease that was known as glandular fever when I was a teenager, Epstein-Barr virus. It's a neurological virus. It lays dormant in your system. I'm 57 now, and it got triggered by a trauma. The trauma was a car accident. Somebody hit me in the back and I got whiplash, and the whiplash has developed into multiple sclerosis. All the rubbish that's going on at the moment about...
Oh, you're on mute, Darren.
Oh, what happened?
You're still on mute, Darren. Would like to unmute and continue? Or Ruben, could you comment?
I've been thinking about this because I've been thinking about how this has affected a lot of people and out of power. I personally would have. I mean, I would fight it too as much as you can, but I would go to a hotel with a Wi-Fi, and and the hotel's not the most convenient, but I'd make the power company try to get them to pay for the hotel because I can't live without power as well. So you should be a priority. You should, but it's a shame, you have to fight for it.
Thank you. I know I'm just conscious of time, and there's still some questions in the chat. I'm just going to ask Sharon's question here. She asked, what's your view on specialist services versus universal services? She works in employability, and it's often an uphill battle to get universal services to understand they actually don't provide services suited to everyone. Therefore, specialist services where a person feels their needs are being met are not a duplication. I
mean, that's a good statement. I don't know how I can add to that, but it's just education and understanding the social model and the medical model of disability, and the barriers that people face. People face physical barriers, the lack of curbs, or the curbs and the lack of ramps and the lack of lifts, communication barriers and information barriers, how we're getting information. Attitudes is the big one, that people's attitudes is a big barrier for disabled people, and organizational. And I would, you know, I could do a whole section on organizational barriers, because again, disabled people have to be involved in making and changing policies and changing rules, and to be more inclusive.
Thank you, Ruben. I think just one final kind of question here. Deborah actually will be meeting an external architects this Friday to look at space study in the library. And she said this webinar should give us some tools to look at what they have to offer with a critical eye and be able to address accessibility early in the consultation stage and remove any potential barriers. I mean, in more general, because our audience here are from different public bodies in the UK, like what advice would you give them to how do they engage and consult with different groups? Because like you said, disability, there's both visibility and invisible disability. And often I think for us, we tend to unconsciously bias towards the visible disability. What advice would you share with everyone?
Yeah, don't just have it a box tick, a tick boxing exercise, and go to a charity and you know, getting them involved is good, but you can't get every charity, because there's, you know, autism and Down syndrome and all these charities out there, and you can't address all of them. You're going to have to get an access auditor in to get in, because look, you make changes now. Changes they can't negatively impact a non-disabled worker. So you have a space that needs to be quiet. Somebody with autism, and they want quiet. They don't like having loud noises. So you make a quiet space for them. Then you have somebody with a visual impairment who needs bright lights but there can be in an organization that addressed by having certain areas for specific people, and everybody can use them. Look, even if you don't have an impairment, you might need some quiet time. So you can go into that work zone and work from there for a little bit. It's overstimulation. How many times have we read about overstimulation of our phones and our TVs and our computer monitors? So it's about having a disability network within the company.
Thank you, Ruben. So we need to wrap up. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. So if you have any more further questions or comments, do email me or Andrea, and I will pass them on to Ruben. So if you want to organize some better awareness training for your team, and Ruben actually got some dates already put in a diary that you can attend his social model of disability training in May, September, and December. If you could next slide, please, Ruben. We also have got 4 additional webinars coming up. The next one is next Monday on reading, and then we will be talking about positive habits for a happier workforce, and then celebrating International Women's Day on break biases to lead differently, and then making the most of midlife talent on the 22nd of March. Thank you, Ruben. So if you want any more news about alerts about our webinars, do sign up to our training alerts on the website, or just let myself or Andrea know, and then we will add you to a mailing list. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you found this useful. Stay connected, and like I said, drop us a message, send us an email. Let's keep in touch. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.